Greetings and salutations. You are listening to the Into the North podcast, where we take a look at the competitive side of the Commander format, also known as CDH. I am one of your hosts, Reed, aka Sick Robot, and today I'm joined by my co-host, Morgan, aka Spleenface.
How's it going, everyone?
And our very special guest, Nick, aka Joking101. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Hey, my name is Nick, otherwise known as Joking101, and I'm super excited to be here.
Great. Nick is sort of downplaying himself. Nick is a pretty huge TO in the CDH scene, the main cog in the wheel that is Monarch events. And that's very apt because today we're going to be talking about the tournament structure of CDH events. Might sound boring. I can assure you it's not. There's a lot of depth here, and if you've ever had any amount of interest in either running a local event or getting involved in online events at all, this is probably going to be a pretty huge info dump, so you should keep on listening. But before we get into that, anybody have any interesting stuff they've been up to recently?
Not especially on my end.
No.
I'll
say, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I went in top 4 at Playmax 3, so that was cool. It's my first top 4 at a
right,
CDH
you did.
Tournament.
Good stuff. You're playing a Tim Narog, right?
That's correct. I think Razaketh is a really good Magic card, and I don't think I won a single game with Razaketh, but it was in the deck, and that part was cool.
I was about to say, I'm not really seeing a huge relation between Tim the Rog and Razaketh, aside from just the fact that you can play Razaketh in that deck. But
well,
you are allowed to do that. Yes,
it's a 2-mana A+B. You know, like land, like if you're gonna land, you know, if you're gonna, you know, Oracle Consult, it's much easier to just Dark Ritual and Tomb Reanimate and win immediately off of that.
Wait, why is it easier?
Because ROG. The ROG Razaketh line is cast ROG, sack ROG.
You need a Dark Ritual.
Exactly. You need the acceleration. Come on.
You don't need any blue mana.
It's not just
blue mana is so
you
hard to
need
get.
The Dark Ritual.
Yeah, but you can get black from a Lotus Petal or other cards. You know, Coal in the Week. Can we play them? There's options.
You know, Undead Spirit Guide. All those
when?
cards.
Please give it to me.
No.
Please no. We
we
have zero need for that one.
I want it.
I actually just received my my pimped out SSBM controller today. Super
nice.
happy. It's got Hall effect sensors and clickety clackety tactile key switches for all the buttons. It's fancy, pretty hot. I'm looking forward to abusing the shit out of it. But without further ado on that, we're just going to quickly jump into housekeeping, of which there is nothing, but we do have some new developments / things that we want to shout out to you guys. Primarily, the fact that Tier 1 Con is coming up real soon. By the time that we release this episode, it's probably either less than a week to maybe up to a week away. So if you're listening and that hasn't yet come to pass, you should definitely mark it on your calendar and go check it out when that happens. It's going to be on the weekend of the 6th and 7th, and it'll be streamed, correct?
As far as I'm aware.
Okay. Do you know what channel that's going on, or do we have to wait until we can chill that somewhere else?
I think that if we're doing
Presumably
this,
it'll be on the.
Yeah, I think that's probably twitch.tv / Tier 1 MTG is my bet.
Cool.
Yes, that's it.
So yeah, mark that one on your calendars. Make sure to go check that out, follow, and because you'll be able to see all of us on this podcast over there when that's happening. So
very
check
true.
it out.
That's gonna be sweet.
Oh yeah, I mean it's gonna be a great time. We've said this every episode since we sort of got the announcement, but like literally the entire podcast was super psyched to be there last year. It was like just an awesome trip all around, just fantastic. Would recommend highly to anybody that wants to go check it out. So please do.
Yeah, Europe's a pretty cool continent, honestly.
You know, It's good solid like A- tier. Maybe like right below like Southern Ontario in terms of tier lists, but I'm yeah. Seriously, like Copenhagen though, like actually just like S+ tier city.
It's very cool city.
Oh, that city. And then aside from that, March Hazard is also going to be running Oktoberfest, one of the two, which is going to be coming up in October. What?
No,
13th?
it's in November.
No, later.
Yeah, because Wizards scheduled.
Oh, right.
Yeah. Wizards decided they wanted to schedule their 30-year anniversary the same weekend as us, so we moved ours. I don't think they were going to. So.
How nice of them.
Even if you asked like really nicely, they wouldn't.
we thought about asking really nicely, but we just decided we were going to move the entire just move the contract. And the new space that we got for it's the same hotel, but the new space, it's the November 18th through the 20th, is actually 750 square feet larger for almost the same price. So we got even more space with which to see all of the beautiful people.
And accommodate. Nice. And if you're interested in going to that, that's going to be in, well, maybe not in Philadelphia, but outside of Philadelphia.
It is in downtown Philadelphia.
It is in downtown? Okay, there you go. Right there. If you're interested in checking it out, you can go to Monarch's website at
Monarch.cards.
Monarch.cards.
Oh, I got it.
Nice.
Got it. That's mine's like a steel trap right in there. Yeah, so you can go pick up tickets for that. Probably by the time we get this out, they do have an early patrons only ticket sale. So if you are a patron of Monarch, definitely, I don't know why I have to tell you to go buy tickets to October, but go do that. And if you're not, then keep your eye out for when they open up public ticket sales.
Yeah, tickets will open soon, and we got tons of space. It'll be room for up to I think at least 250 and potentially more. So we've got the space for as many folks as want to attend.
Nice. So with that all wrapped up, I think we're good to get into our main topic, which is, again, we're going to be talking about tournament structure. All the nitty gritty of sort of running CDH events in general. I do think this is a pretty interesting topic, as much as it might sound incredibly dry to people who listen to this podcast for, I don't know, really intense discussions about single card slots and decks and actually like play patterns in games. But I think like the meta discussion around this for tournaments is actually very interesting, because it's not a solved thing at this point. I feel like a lot of esports, or I'll classify like CDH as sort of an esport. I feel like a lot of esports sort of solidify their tournament structures within like a couple of years of sort of having like the initial inkling of a competitive scene for the most part. Like they'll typically tend to centralize around like, yeah, you end up with like a double elimination bracket with like pools on day one or whatever, like stuff like that. CDH, not so much. I mean, we sort of have a lot of the like traditional, just like how you run CDH events, but people are still experimenting with formats all over. So I think there's a lot of stuff to be talked about here.
Well, in our defense, StarCraft 2 Wings of Liberty came out in 2010, and the main StarCraft tournament, GSL, unveiled a new tournament format this year in 2022. So we're not the worst for...
Wow. I didn't even know that.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So I guess we'll
The one thing that I would say with that is that we're still, like, even within the context of still testing new tournament structures, we're still finding problems with them, right? Like, that's, I think, the biggest thing that I have is that I look at, I have not seen a single tournament ran where I was like, yep, that's perfect. There were no issues. Like, there are still structural issues with the tournaments that we run. So it's just sort of a testament to the depth of just even the tournament structure itself with regards to this format.
Yeah, definitely. I'm actually thinking we can probably hop in first here, sort of like at the base, like the sort of the core of like how you actually need to run a tournament for them, which is probably like the most complex actual running of the tournament, but is also like possibly like the most important thing to actually have right, which is just for day one of tournament, or initial rounds of tournament, however you want to structure it, if it's like a 1-day tournament, stuff like that. Just because I think there's like
pre-playoffs.
Yes,
the open rounds.
Yeah,
the
open
bracket
rounds,
or
like whatever it is.
Or open bracket, sure.
Because there are a lot of ways to run it. I mean, again, if you don't know what CDH is, I guess, and you're listening, 4-player free-for-all formats are really rough to run. Even large like free-for-all games, like a lot of battle royales are still having problems with tournament structures and like incentives and how you actually like get like decent results out of like the people who are playing well should win a larger percentage of the time than the people who are not playing well. Like,
right.
A bunch of games are like huge games with tons of money behind them are still struggling with this issue, and it actually gets like amplified a lot more when you get down to like the like lower number of players in games. Like it's almost like CDH was designed, or EDH in general was designed to be as difficult to run tournaments for as possible. Yes, I know it was designed as a casual. It was designed as a casual format. Yes, but like I'm not sure that you could come up with a game that's harder to run tournaments for, like if you actively tried in Magic, unless it was literally just like, I don't know, like everybody has to flip coins and then guess what everybody else like flipped and then like play cards based on whatever. Like it's just so insanely difficult to figure that stuff out. So
I do like how immediately your first thought of how to make a tournament harder to run is to add coins. I wonder if that's, I wonder if there's anything to be said there about coins.
Oh, let's not go there. We're gonna steer clear of that one.
We're gonna just sidestep that bullet real quick. But yeah, it's like but like really, it's like CDH is almost like in this hell zone where like 2-player free for all, great, that's just 1v1, incredibly easy to run tournaments for. Once you get up to like 100 people, like yeah, you just everybody sort of accepts that the variance is there, and then you're just like, yeah, like I'm just gonna play my best. You're having so few interactions with other people that like it just doesn't really matter. You just have to accept the luck of the draw. Four players specifically is just like super awkward. Potentially like the only worst number would be 3 players, I think.
The one benefit of doing smaller pods is that you have fewer repeat opponents. So like in theory 10 players would be horrible, because how are you supposed to have, you're going to play against the same people all the time.
Right. I think with 10 players though, at that point you just get to a point where it might just be correct with like more than that many players that you just like take the top person from a bunch of these pods, shuffle them into like new pods, and let everybody else play each other again, and just like keep doing it that way. But
well,
yeah.
I think like 10 players could actually be easier in a game that wasn't like CEDH. Like the variance in CEDH is so high that like a 10-player pod, there's a decent chance that like it's literally not unrealistic that you just lose before you get a turn. Like it'll happen all the time, but even if that happens like 1 in 100 games in your tournament, like that's that game was useless for determining like if a given player was good or not. So if you like when you have 10 people in a lower variance environment, it actually does start to, like more people does start to decrease the variance to an extent, like then like in a 4-player environment, it's still easy to like target people or have like one like have a bunch of sort of factors that correct it or focus on the person who played well early and got ahead. But like when there's 100 people, you just sort of can't keep track of what everyone else is doing.
And it's hard to like coordinate an effort against somebody, and also like single players making mistakes in a 100-player are like less likely to make it so that like everybody loses, right?
Yeah,
true.
Well, or just like most games aren't as inherently unstable as CEDH games, where minor mistakes mean that everyone loses, which is another problem.
Yeah, the power level
we'll get around to.
Yeah, the power level is just so high that it has, I mean, single or small things, and the other issue, of course, is the best of one nature, right? You have the fewest conceivable number of games you could use to gather information. So small influences on individual games represents a significant amount of the data that you have for a given game within a given tournament.
Well, so let's actually talk about that real quick because I think like it's good to get it all out there for the audience. So, very simple question: why is CDH run is in best of one sets in a tournament? Because that is the way that it is run. I don't think you'll ever find a CDH tournament like everywhere anywhere that runs not in best of one rounds, rather, I guess, rather than matches. In terms of like every round is going to be, if you're in a pod in that round, you get one game to make it, and then the person that wins that game gets the points for that round, and then you move on to the next round.
I mean, the crux of the issue is just that a single game of 1v1 Magic is less than a third of the time of a single game of four-way free-for-all Magic. Like, it's entirely the duration of the game.
And this is sort of the other issue with CDH. Things just take a long time to do when everybody has to have input on every game action. Obviously, that's not how games play out, but just the fact that in two-player, you have two people taking actions, and typically only one person has to acknowledge that the action, like, resolves before you continue doing stuff. In CDH, you have 4 players taking actions, and all of them have to say, yes, I want this to resolve, we can move on.
Yeah, exactly.
And let's be honest, the actions are also a lot simpler because you're only weighing how bad a card is for you. Like, if you have something to do about it, you could be like, how bad is it for me if I let this happen? Oh, it's not that bad? Okay, cool. Versus, like, in CDH, you have to be like, okay, but is it worse for the other person than it is for me? And if it is, then, does that mean that I let it happen, or is it still too bad for me, or et cetera, et cetera?
The games are just so complex.
Yeah, they take and the best part is, it's not even just that they take a super long time, it's they take a super long time, except then sometimes they also don't.
Yeah.
That's that.
Like,
Yeah,
I don't think there's another competitive game where, like, you could sit down and like, if there were no time limits, quite reasonably play a 5-minute game, or quite reasonably play like a hour and 5-minute game, let alone a 2-hour game.
Yeah, I also, like, I have no doubt that if tournaments were uncapped, we would have multiple tournaments at this point where, like, the rounds had gone past 3 hours.
We had that happen at Oko last year, did we not? I think we had a game that went 3 hours on time.
I don't think any of them were 3 hours, but there were 3. One of the tails of the tree had, like, the quarterfinal and semifinal games were both, like, around 2.5 hours.
Yeah,
and as was the final.
Yeah, that's 5 hours for 2 games of Magic, which is that rate is prohibitive in the vast majority of situations.
That's fine if you're playing EDH at FNM and you started at, like,
Is
I don't
it?
know, like,
Is that even fine?
6, and then your LGS is open until like 11:30 because it's a Friday, and
you get
the
2
people hate
games
each other,
in?
and you get 2 games in. I would be happy about that, but that's like you're still like
if they're-
okay with it, I think.
If they're good games, it's fine, right? Like, if it's 2.5 hours of engaging Magic, it doesn't matter. It's very
That being
hard for
said-
there to be 2.5 hours of engaging Magic, but you know.
Yeah, also, a 2.5 game of CDH is very likely to have at least 2 people in that pod not actually playing Magic for, like, probably at least an hour of that game.
Yeah, that's true.
It's very difficult for, in a long game of CDH, every player involved to actually be, like, actually playing the game by the end of it. But yeah, actually, this is good. I think we'll actually just get into this topic just now, because we're already on it already. Talking about the round timers in tournaments, because this is pretty huge. You obviously need to restrict the amount of time that the games take, because, as we just discussed, they take a lot of time to finish if you don't cap them, which means that you have to figure out how to actually cap them. I feel like this is actually one of the, just round timers in general, is sort of one of the places that we're seeing still, like, the most experimentation in terms of people are just, like, people are the most willing to change round timers probably out of like most tournament structures at this point, at least observationally.
I mean, I definitely have seen multiple different round timers across tournaments that are of a reasonable size in the past year, right? Some of these things are, some of the things that we'll discuss are pretty standard. You don't really see anybody deviating from them. Round timers, that's not one of them. People are very comfortable moving this stuff around, and the debate between 75 and 90 has been going back and forth for a while. I think that very few people are arguing for more than 90 minutes and fewer than 75 minutes. But I could see an argument for either of the two. But I think 75 and 90 are the two main ones that I've seen, at least in major events over the past year.
Yeah, I think in the past I've seen people suggesting different ones, but I think definitely we've sort of, maybe not consensus, but something kind of like consensus is, okay, yeah, like more than 90 is too long, and less than 75 is probably too short. I think it's also interesting, because I think one of the biggest, I think mostly now, or I see 75 most often now, and I think one of the things that actually prompted that was the Time Twisted Tournament 2, where the rounds took like literally forever. But they did 90 minutes and 2 full cycles of turns. And people went, okay, that's way too long. And then I think like they generally switched to 75 and 1. But like it would have been interesting to, I don't know how many 90-minute and 1 cycle tournaments we've seen, but I'd be interested to see
like 75 and 2. Playing like that a bit. I like 15 minutes is probably like not enough to add the extra round on, but
I would be inclined to look if we wanted to add a second. So there's an interesting philosophical thing here when we're talking about turns, right? Quantity of turns. The intention of turns in 60-minute rounds is for the match to end. That you have played, some number of games thus far, and you are in usually your second or third game, and we need to end the game. It's going to be, you have to end it. This is the way to do it. If you are using turns as a timing mechanism, right? Like you're adding the second round of turns in because you want to increase the length of a game, but to prescribe it in some way, right? To prescribe the exact quantity of Magic that will be played. That's a little bit of a departure from the current philosophy of turns. That isn't to say you can't do it, but I think it's interesting to explore that as something that, like, that's not originally what it was meant to serve, or the purpose that it was meant to serve. And the one piece I'd add on to that as a corollary is that if we are willing to quantify some amount of Magic that is left in the game, what's to stop us from setting an amount of Magic to be played in total, right? What if instead of time we used turns? And after 15 turns, your game is over, no matter what's happened, as an alternative to time itself.
Oh, Jesus Christ. That... See, like, I was like, that's an interesting idea. And then you said 15 turns, and I was like, all right, rounds are gonna take 5 hours.
Yep.
All right, cool.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I just didn't want to, like, cut off stacks who are trying to kill people 4 damage at a time, Like, I don't know.
Yeah, it's definitely, like, I think you're touching on an interesting point, which, I think often doesn't, like, get brought up in the discourse around tournament structures, which is that, like, ideally there would be no round timers, right?
Yeah.
And games would just conclude in a timely manner. And
yep.
We can't have events taking, like, literal weeks, so there has to be a round timer. And so, like, yeah, how do you pick a round timer that allows for a reasonable tournament structure that like, has the minimal interference on how games naturally play out? Is definitely, a tough balance to walk. And I think I agree, or maybe you weren't even necessarily making this point, but I certainly see kind of an issue with, like, the more turns you have, that does feel, it starts to feel prescriptive rather than descriptive. Like, I'm not in favor, I wouldn't think I would be in favor of, in general, shortening the shortening the time and adding more turns.
It also
yeah, it's like
go ahead.
No, go for it. No, go for it.
The one sort of departure from this philosophy is if you're willing to discuss being more prescriptive with certain components of rounds, right? I think when we talk about the need of a time limit, right, the need to end the game in some capacity, there's this really crazy idea that I think that the CDH community is a little bit too harsh towards, because it feels that it isn't CDH, and that is using life totals after time runs out. I have very much warmed up to this idea that you should use life totals after time runs out, because it gives, within the context of the rule structure, intention to certain decks, right? It gives decks that intend to win via combat damage eventually the knowledge that they only need to get to a specific point where they have the most life, or, that their opponents have the least life, and then the game can end. So you could say do 60-minute rounds with one turn cycle, because really the only decks that are trying to win after an hour are ones that are trying to win with life total. Now, you argue whether or not that's true, but the point is that there's this additional idea that we could change the structure of the tournament, change the structure of how some decks are composed, and address this tournament structure with this alternative idea, without having, compromising some of what the decks are trying to do, which I think is interesting.
I think there's interesting stuff there. I don't think life total as a raw number is probably the way to go, just because of some of the perverse incentives that you end up with there in terms of like, I'm not going to kill this person that I need dead, because we're probably going to go to a draw, so I'm just going to hit this person that I have no chance of killing, but I need them to be at a lower life total than I am.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff. I think an interesting one, if it didn't require, or at least for like, if a digital platform could track this automatically, I think it would work really well, but just something like most damage done as a player rather than life total. So like I've dealt 40 points of damage this game, the next person in line has dealt 25 points of damage, I win, because I produced the most damage, and that doesn't actually introduce that many perverse incentives in terms of like, you don't care what type of damage you're doing, who the damage is going to, aside from yourself. You're just like dealing damage. The issue is the tracking of that, right?
Yeah, I think the other issue with resolving draws with another mechanic is just, I mean, first of all, you unintentionally reward some decks. B, you're going to see people designing their decks to take advantage of that, which I think is not what, like, we don't want people to be building their decks to go to time.
Why?
Like that. Why?
Yeah, I mean, what is the problem with having people designing their decks to win after the round goes to time? Like, outside of having more draws by design, but that, like, those decks are already going to time anyways, right? I don't think that we're going to see many decks who are just like, oh, time for me to start slow playing. Like, I just don't think that that's a particularly realistic outcome for the...
Okay, so number one, I do. I mean, maybe I wouldn't necessarily... Slow play is obviously like a term that I'm leery of using because it has a very specific meaning. But no, I absolutely... I do think we would see decks intending to drag out games, and I think it also creates, like, and maybe this is fine from a TO perspective, but as a player, there's an inflection point where you stop playing for one win con and start playing for another, and I think that has the potential to create like an unenjoyable gameplay experience when you essentially you get outvoted on when that switch happens. Like, okay, we all sort of understand what we're playing for until, some number of people with some amount of resources decide, okay, no, we're no longer playing for that. We're now playing for this other incentive. People completely change their behaviors, and it just creates kind of a like
No, I hear what you're saying. Like, my question would be like, does that happen? Doesn't that currently happen with games going to draws, where there's a point in time where people stop playing to win and start playing to draw?
Yeah, but the difference is you end with a draw, which like gives some measure of consolation, I would say.
Sure.
Like so what I'm saying is like, okay, I'm massively ahead. Like I'm, I have way more cards than everyone else or something, but like I'm, I can control this game effectively, but I'm pretty, stacked out, or my win con's been exiled or something like that. And then there's like a certain point where, everyone in the game says, oh, well, we're no longer playing the game that you're winning, we're now playing this different game.
Sure.
And like, sucks to be you. And I think
sense.
that is like, I don't necessarily have something that I'm saying that I can say like is objectively wrong about that. It's not inherently unfair. It sounds like a shitty experience.
Yeah, I think that's pretty fair.
Definitely agree in terms of I think introducing alternate win conditions is a bit it's a bit of a tough one to come to terms with, especially if it's out of line with the goals of the actual game. Yeah, in terms of actually getting to time, I think we should get on to talking about the actual like tournament structures of getting there in the first place. We'll get back to I guess going pre top cut. It's really hard to describe the sections of a tournament generally without one specifically referring to a given format.
You could just do group stage and playoff stage.
Yeah, sure. Groups and playoffs.
But it's like not a group stage.
Yeah, it's not a group stage, but whatever. the open format, or the open stage.
Yeah,
and
I like
closed
that.
stage, I guess, of a tournament. So in the open stage of a tournament, there actually has been a fair amount of experimentation over the course of CDH's life with this. Maybe not so much recently, although no, I guess not. I'm trying to think of tournaments that haven't run with Swiss recently, but I think almost everybody has been running Swiss.
Several online tournaments have done fluid rounds, right?
Yes. And I believe smaller invitationals have done round robin.
Invitationals are the only ones that have done things that aren't exactly Swiss and fluid as the dichotomy.
But let's just go through and define what these actually are, so that people sort of understand what we're talking about. In terms of
they're not Swiss.
Yeah, they're not actually Swiss. It's the Swiss is adapted from the open stage of the tournament being called Swiss in traditional Magic tournaments, but that is not the case in CDH. CDH is, it's not Swiss. It's like partial round robin, I guess you would call it.
Yeah, I have no idea what the technical term is or what the proper name is. I just call it Swiss. I just call one of them, like the two different types of Swiss that I work with. I call one seeded Swiss and I call one no repeat Swiss, even though they both are no repeat. Like it's not like there's no good language here, I don't think.
Yeah. So what we're talking about is Swiss, partial Swiss, whatever, or partial round robin. Typically how most open CEH tournaments are run at this point for the open stage.
Yep.
Being that effectively you're just randomly paired with people and play against them until you get to a point where you cut and then count up the points, and then the top X number of people move on to a closed stage and everybody else gets left out in the cold. That is how most CDH tournaments are run at this point in the open stage. There are a bunch of additional sort of factors that you have to take into account with that as well. Some of the primary ones would be you don't want to play against the same player multiple times in a tournament, or you want to play against the same player as few times as possible in the tournament, so that you get the widest range of matchups. Potentially, there's also seeding involved, although I believe seeding is it's not really been a thing that people have really taken into account, considering, especially that like nobody's actually guaranteed to play anybody else, and you only get into elimination like way further down the line. So seeding in open rounds is sort of not super necessary, I'd say.
So there's I think a lot to be said about that. Do you want to dive into that now or give it some time?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no, we'll just hop into it now.
Yeah, so with seeding, what we're talking about here is people who win playing against other people who win, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
or potentially the reverse of
losers
you
losers,
do like
right?
or like winners play losers in like, or like you do like stratified, like you seed like the top X over 4 people into one pot apiece, and the next block of that many people into the second seat, quote unquote second seat, so on and so forth. But
yeah. So generally, pushing people in specific directions during the open stage, right? So we have seen Monarchs events and Tier 1 events have ran using true no repeat. So the only constraint when players are paired is that they haven't played against each other. And above a certain number of players, this is mathematically guaranteed, right? You can make it. You can mathematically prove that you will always be able to pair people because the number of players outscales the number of rounds that you're going to play, right? If you're going to play 1,000 rounds, it doesn't matter how many players you have for the most part. You're going to eventually have to play against somebody else. Well, I guess 3,000 players. But the point is that within our structures, at least, and the ones that we've ran thus far, you're going to very quickly, over about 40 or 50 players, you're not going to have to play against anybody else. And the math of doing that's pretty easy. So we're able to pull it off. When you do seed, say, winners versus winners, which is generally pretty standard, it's much more common for players to be paired up against people that they've already played. The big... And a lot of tournaments have started doing this. So Take the Tower did it, Playmax 3 did it. The latest version of Squirebot, when it comes out, and it's in beta right now, will have both as options. So you can both do it completely random and seeded with some amount of randomness added in as well. Obviously, it'll try to not pair you against people you've already played against. The biggest criticism that I've seen from seeded tournaments, right, where you do pair winners against winners, is the one, that the final round is almost always entirely draws. But 2, and I think this piece actually might be more important, that if you win the first round, your tie breaks are just completely out of whack. So the general gold standard for tie breaks within within CDH is the amount of potential points your opponents could have gotten divided by the total number of points they did get, or maybe flip that. But it's essentially a ratio of the amount of points your opponents got to the amount that they could have. If you go into round 2 with a win, you're up against winners, and so that stat is very high. Very, very high. And so if you win game 1 and lose game 2 and 3, your tiebreak stat is way, way higher than somebody who lost round 1 and round 2 and then won round 3, because they haven't been seeded up against winners. So
which compounds if you have to pair people up or down as well.
Yeah,
exactly. So I love the idea of seeding. I think it's probably optimal, but we don't have a good tiebreak for this, right? We don't have a good way to make it so that you have a more balanced thing after round 1.
Yeah, it's a rough problem to solve. I think like maybe the only way that you do it is, again, like you don't pair winners against winners. You pair like winners against people who aren't winning. But that has its own issues, and then there's just like it gets very complicated very quickly.
That also, it'll definitely create issues in later rounds where where then targeting like absolutely becomes a thing. In that context, it's like, oh well, let's make sure the person who's like high in the seeding doesn't win this pod, which I think is generally like another thing that we have to contend with, that maybe we didn't specifically mention, is that the presence of multiple opponents in a round means that sometimes you are in a position where you can choose who you lose to, and so you have to make sure your tournament structure isn't creating incentives on that front.
Which, hilariously enough, is something that is actually coming up like in a couple of days for us as of the time we're recording this episode in the MLC.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. These aren't, to be clear, a lot of the problems that we're talking about aren't just theoretical problems. There are things that have and will continue to crop up in tournaments until we find some unified, like, greatest way to run a tournament, which shouldn't actually exist for CDH.
I would love if it did.
I'd like to think that the people who have thought about this are, smart enough and have put in enough work that there isn't just like a super obvious solution that they're missing.
Well,
especially gone through like what,
not a super obviously not an
tournaments.
obvious solution, but like a solution that once discovered is obviously better that they're missing. Like, I really don't think that's the case.
I mean, I think that one of the things that really showed to me how many flaws there are in every system is when we were writing the MSIPG and the MSTR, right? Which are multiplayer versions of the Infraction Procedure Guide and the Magic Tournament Rules, which are the documents that run 1v1, events. We had 2 or 3 L2s and an L3, a couple L1s, many of whom are highly invested and highly engaged in CDH specifically. None of them found a solution that solved this problem. And there's other things that we haven't even gotten to, like the day 2. Like, what do we do on day 2 or the playoff stage? There is really no simple answer to this. And at least, unless there's somebody out there with a Omega brain, and if they do, come forward and tell us how we're supposed to be doing it, because there's...
Yes, please tell us.
Yeah, please. We're struggling over here. The next thing... Yeah, you want to move on to Fluid?
No, yeah, and just like give a definition, because we said that we would, and I feel like we've left people hanging for enough time at this point. So yeah, the other sort of like primary, like open stage format that we've seen is fluid rounds. This is we haven't seen this in anything aside from online tournaments, specifically Trice tournaments. I don't think we've actually seen experimentation with this for
I've never seen
webcam
it for
tournaments.
Only Trice.
But the idea of fluid rounds as opposed to Swiss, where you just get paired in static rounds, so there are a set 5 rounds in day 1, maybe. You get through 5 rounds, and then that's all the Magic you play for today, and you know that you're always going to play 5 rounds. Fluid rounds are called fluid rounds because the idea is that you're always having to play at least some number of games in a day, and at most some other number of games in a day. But you, as the player, get to choose how many rounds that you're playing within that bound. So say the bound is you have to play at least 4 games in this period of time in order to qualify for the top cut for the closed rounds. And you can't play more than X number so that you can't like accumulate a win percentage. And the idea of this is that rather than counting points, which is how you would count Swiss, so a win would be worth some number of points, and then the people with the highest number of points make it into the closed rounds. For fluid rounds, the idea is that you just play for pure win percentage, and then you make cuts based on win percentages. And the reason why this hasn't happened in real life or for webcam, although you could do it for webcam, the reason you only see this online is because it is a bitch to fucking work out in real life, because you basically need a centralized looking for game system that can randomly choose players from within a given pool to like meter out into pods to then make play, and you also have to contend with a bunch of the issues in Swiss, like not letting people play against each other too many times, etc., etc.
There's so many cool things about fluid rounds, and so many problems, so many more problems. I think that the biggest selling point from fluid rounds for me is how it is able to aggregate variance with game length. Because if you win a game in 10 minutes, you can get back in the queue. So somebody who's played 3 games in an hour and a half could be queued up for their game 4 against somebody's game 2 who played 1 game over the last hour and a half. So you have this nice balance where games that are fast and games that are slow can be aggregated in terms of time. So a single 6-hour, open fluid round stage could cover 4 or 5 games of Magic, whereas in standard Swiss, it might not be able to let you play that many. There are, of course, consequences to this luxury.
And they abound.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you want to go over some of the challenges that you've had with implementing fluid rounds, Joking? Because God knows we could all talk about our experiences with the structure, I think.
I think that the first problem is that there is no conceivable world to do this without a bot, and the software necessary for a bot to run this is tricky.
It's a bit complex. A teensy bit.
Yeah. The very first Oktoberfest, I actually ran fluid rounds manually. So some number of people would queue up. I'd plug everybody into a spreadsheet. The spreadsheet would do a quick check to see that nobody had played against anybody else, create pods, and fire it off. A little Python script built into a Google Sheet, and it worked. It was perfectly functional. The problem is when you start going at scale, and especially in person, right? I think in person this is almost entirely non-viable, because not only do you have to, in person you have some number of tables that are numbered, so the bot now has to keep track of which tables are free, so it can send 4 people to that table. Online you have unlimited rooms, unlimited tables. You just need to tell people where to go, and they can sort of figure it out themselves even. But in person, I think that the complexity of just like pairing people, having them mill about, I can only imagine trying to walk down, with everybody at least sitting down at the same time, you have some amount of like structure and timing and stuff like that is, reasonable for people. But the complexity even of just communicating what fluid rounds are, like, it doesn't make sense. It's not very intuitive. So I can't imagine trying that in person is going to go very well. Although I am curious to see in more online events if it's still worth exploring. But
yeah, anyone who's ever been to a GP knows how much confused milling about there is, and like that's with about as rigorous a structure as they can manage.
Yeah. I think fluid rounds are very cool. There's some world in which we try fluid rounds again for some of our online events. I know we'll talk at some point about qualifiers. We're considering doing fluid rounds for one of our qualifier events, just because I think there's more depth still to be explored, and there's more nuance that we haven't, kinks that can be ironed out that just haven't yet. I think that the aggregate of variance is such a huge selling point that it forces me to continue to consider it. But other than that, I think Swiss is just more clean, right? You don't need to teach the whole tournament organizing staff and the players how it works. Everybody knows what Swiss looks like.
Yeah. One of the other huge issues with fluid rounds is that you need buy-in from all the players, and you need all the players to actually understand how the tournament format works. Aside, without in Swiss, especially in 1v1, you just put a sheet of paper on the wall, and people know who they're playing against, and then when the next sheet of paper goes up, they just play against that person, and then eventually put a sheet of paper up that says, these 16 people are through, everybody else go home. In fluid rounds, it's not at all that easy to get people to actually understand what's going on.
Yeah, everybody needs a phone with connection to whatever software program you're going to be using, so that they can queue themselves up when they're ready for a game. And you have, oh, we want to play together, so we'll queue at the same time, so this piece of software will put us together. And then you have people who are like, oh, that person just queued up and they're really good, so I'm going to wait to queue up instead of queuing up right now, because I don't want to be paired against them. And you end up introducing all of these variables that players now have to start thinking about. And also, should I play another game? That's, I think, one of the biggest pieces that I've gotten as frustration from players is they're like, okay, cool, I'm currently 2-2. I don't know if I should try to play for 3-2 or if I should not play at all. And that decision kind of sucks to make.
It does.
Do you have something to say about the decision to play?
Yeah, for context, everybody listening, I played in a fluid round tournament. I believe it was it Oktoberfest? Whatever, it was a Marchesa.
I think it was Marchesa.
It might have been Marchesa. Anyway, a couple of years ago at this point. where, yeah, it was fluid rounds. I played. I thought I did pretty well. I believe at the time that I played my final game, I think it was 4 games. I think I played 4
wanna
games. Might have
say
been 5.
I want to say you were 2-1.
It might have been 3. No, I think it was.
I think you had to play at
2-1.
least 4 games.
Yeah, to play at least 4. I think it was like. I think it was 2. No, I think it was 2-1-1.
Yeah, I think.
That sounds right. That sounds
because draws are where all the fuckiness happens in tournament standings.
Yep.
I believe I was 2-1-1, and at the time of me finishing my 4th game, I was, I believe, 9th in the standings. And I had to make the decision of whether or not I wanted to play another round or not. I believe I had like 40 minutes until the cutoff for new games begun. So I waited for a bit. We got to the end of that. I believe I'd been, I think it was either still in 9th or I'd been knocked down like a slot.
I think you were high. I think you were actually higher than 9th.
Oh, I might have been. You know what? I think I might have been like 4th or 5th. Anyway, by the time that the cutoff happened, I believe I was 9th at that point in the standings, with a cut to top 16, and or was it cut to top 13?
Top 13. It was top 13.
Yeah, I was 13, really bad at this. Yeah. Anyway, I think I had 4 slots between myself and the bottom, and there were like 5 ongoing games or something like that. And I was like, yeah, okay.
There were more than 5 ongoing games, but there were only, I think there were like 5 or 6 games where like one of the participants could actually pass you if they won.
Yeah. So I was just like, yeah, you know what? Like, so much has to go wrong here, for me to drop out of top 13 that I'll just pass and sit on this. And then as the games continued finishing, the worst part is that I was watching the games that had like a direct impact. Unfortunately, the issue is that there were a lot of other people that were 2-1-1 apparently, and every time a game finished, it just so happened that the result that finished that game reduced my tiebreakers by a significant amount. And this happened about 5 times in a row. And then the games that actually mattered for me started ending. And they started bumping me down basically one at a time. And, like, ruining my tiebreakers as well as those people won. To the point where when I started in 9th with, like, no games left to play. And I ended up in, like, 17th or 18th or something. Yeah. Because my tiebreakers were literally the worst in the entire tournament by the end of it. And 3 separate people that needed to win to bump me out of top 13 won the game. One of which was somebody casted Divergent Transformations to win the game in their deck. Another player had a Chaos Warp in hand, which fizzles 1/2 of Divergent Transformations for anybody listening. You can remove one of the pieces and they'll get 1 polymorph, which doesn't win the game a vast majority of the time. The player casts I'm watching this game in real time. It's on Trice. I'm watching this happen in real time. Player casts Divergent Transformations. Everybody passes except for one player who has a Chaos Warp in hand. Cast the Chaos Warp, targeting another player's Elsha in order
not the Elsha. It was a permanent controlled by the Elsha player to try and spin them into interaction off the top. Instead of targeting one of the Divergent Transformation targets. Anyway, moral of the story, I got absolutely fucked by fluid rounds. I'm never playing fluid rounds again. He's not bitter, though.
Yeah, I just remember looking at that event and going, oh wow, Reed's doing really well. And then, oh wow, Reed did not make the top cut.
Just absolutely tragic.
Yeah.
And on a less personal sort of issue, in discussing fluid rounds with other people, like I've heard the criticism a lot that they feel that fast decks have an advantage, even when the expected value of a round is massively negative.
Yeah. That was... I messed with all of the numbers to make it so that, like, playing a ton... Because, that was Marquesa. It was Marquesa last year, because that was also the year that was the one event where I made all the points just so bizarre. It was like minus 2.25 points for a loss or something. Like it was wacky.
4 for a win, minus 2.25 for a loss, and 1 for a draw, I think.
That sounds right. And yeah, people still felt that that fast decks had an advantage, even though the rounds were massively negative on average. So I don't know. I mean, our numbers never showed that Fastex had an advantage, right? They never showed that the more games you played, the better you did in any of the fluid round events that we did. But it doesn't change the fact that if people feel a certain way, even if they're objectively wrong, they're not gonna stop complaining about it. So
yeah, people are going to have superstitions, and there's not really much that you can do about that.
yeah.
Well, like, okay, so there's a point where you can say having the option to play more games like is a theoretical advantage, right? So like if you're 2-2, or if you're at a record that will place you, let's say, once everyone else has done their games, that would place you at 18th, and it's a top 16 cut. If you reach that point after the last round cutoff, after playing, say, the minimum number of games, then that's your result. Whereas if you reach that 2 hours early, you can decide to play more games. And so, like, that is an advantage theoretically.
Yeah, and it's also, this was a bigger issue when we didn't cap it. So there was one event where we didn't have a cap on the number of games you could play. There was just a fixed amount of time. I actually think this was that Marquesa. And then the cockatrice crashed like three times in 60 minutes. So we ended up adding a ton of time to the end. And so some players played 8 games in the the quantity of time that we had. Some players only played 4. Like, okay, double the number of games, yeah, that is an advantage, right? Clearly there has to be something going, like, that's too much of variance for you to be able to argue that there's not some advantage there. But when you make a nice cap, 4 to 6 games or 4 to 5 games or something, it's much more doable.
Well, but I mean, the counterpoint is that, like, a player at 2-2 in that event. Wait, so it was 4 points for win 2. So I guess, like, you have to pick a point. Basically, the math you're trying to do is you're trying to pick the point where you think the record with the minimum number of games is gonna qualify you for top 16, and then balance around that. So, like, at Marchesa,
that's actually what I did. That was the whole principle.
A 4-4 record was better than a 2-2 record, but a 2-6 record was worse than a 1-3 record. So, like, you had some inflection point in the middle there that was like, let's say it's winning a third of your games, and, like, if you pick that wrong, then you get kind of a weird thing where either, like, based on how well you can calculate what the table is going to look like at the end, approximately, you are faced with the decision whether or not you want to play more games or not, like, very early on, depending on your record. And, like, yeah, it definitely can create a wonky scenario.
I also think that the more tournament complexity, the more people are playing a tournament than they are playing Magic the Gathering, the worse your tournament is. Right? Like,
yeah, like, ideally, the ideal format, like, the idea goals for a tournament should be to reward the players who played the best as frequently as possible, and to not make anybody actually think about the tournament except for the TO and staff.
Yeah.
And
I do wonder,
that's a hard one to get to.
Yeah. I do wonder at some point if there's some world where you want to do hybrid fluid Swiss, where, maybe for the first up to the, if you're doing, let's say, a 6-round tournament, the first 3 rounds are all fluid, because it's easy enough to pair, and you can crunch 3 rounds into maybe 4 hours as opposed to 4.5, which is normally what you have to do for 3 rounds. Maybe you can crunch the time down and just have the a fixed number of fluid rounds. So everybody, you just play 3 rounds as fast as possible with a randomization, then take a break for lunch, and then come back and do your remaining rounds in Swiss. That there might be some way to incorporate some of the benefits of fluid with all of the rest of the benefits of Swiss by fixing the rounds. As long as your final rounds aren't all fluid, you're probably fine.
So on the subject of the benefits of Swiss, as a TO, in your mind, are there tournament structural benefits to to fluid rounds, apart from you just reduce the amount of time people are sitting with their thumbs up their noses waiting for rounds to end? Like, is there?
Well, if you can reduce the so there's a direct correlation between the quantity of time that players spend doing, like, not playing the games, and the amount of time that the amount of games that get played. So when we think about one of the big flaws of CDH, it's the number of games that are played in an event. If you can reduce the amount of time per game on average, right? Like, if you can structure your tournament as if rounds are only 60 minutes because of something like Fluid, you can play more games. You could add in 2 extra games on the end of your day if you've got a system that enables that. So there's definitely the element of, like, it's better for the players, but when we talk about the tournament structure, if we could do 8 rounds in the amount of time it would take for 6 because of Fluid, that's clearly better, right? That's clearly a better structure.
Well, yes and no. Like, sure, it's better if everyone plays 8 rounds.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Is that if you can structure it such that you are able to if you can have everybody complete more games in a shorter period of time.
Okay, so I guess
them.
Yes, I guess, that is the advantage, is that you get to play games equal to basically the average length of a game with your deck, rather than a set round timer, which is, like, going to be higher than that average generally. So It doesn't, like, you can't have everyone play 8 games in 4 hours, but you can probably have everyone play 6 games, or, like, on average, most people will get in 6 games in 6 hours, whereas you'd have to have, like, 45-minute rounds plus turns if you were doing that. Okay, yeah, that's fair.
Yeah. That's it, though.
That's it.
Not that that's... I mean, that's a very real it.
Yes, it is. The only reason to consider is how real of an it in fact happens to be, right? Like, CDH tournaments are just too damn long.
Yeah.
So let's talk about day 2, because that's
I was about to say that's where the fun stuff happens, because oh lord, there's a lot of ways to run day 2s, and a lot of different people have run day 2s in different ways. And I'm gonna be real, I'm not sure any format has been fully successful at all, period. I don't think we have a day 2 format right now, or a closed rounds format right now that actually fully works. I think we have some that are less bad than others, and that's about as far as you get.
Especially not those ones run by those bozos at Monarch. Jeez.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Are you ready to play 3 rounds of single elimination?
Oh boy.
Please no.
So yeah, we'll go through, like, what the primary one is right now, just to give people context, I guess. Which is a vast majority of CDH tournaments currently run with a cut to top 16, where you'll play all the Swiss or Fluid rounds or whatever. You get all of those, whatever counting you're using to evaluate how you rank players. You rank all of the players, and then you take the top 16 and say, you guys are playing tomorrow or in the next 2 rounds or whatever. Everybody else go home. We're going to figure this out with the top 16 people. Typically, that results in the format of, you take 16 people, you split them into 4 pods. The winner of each of those pods goes into a final pod. The winner of that pod wins the tournament. Pretty simple to understand. I think it's probably the most intuitive way to run tournaments, but there are issues with that, and there are also alternatives. I guess, joking, like, just first of all, do you have an opinion on, like, where cut to top 16 into top 4 ranks in terms of, like, just in general how good the format is compared to alternatives?
So I think that the biggest strength of top 16 is its simplicity. You know, everybody gets it. I think that it does generally do a good job of rewarding players who did better in Swiss than, or in, open stage, because you are seeding and you seed turn order, which I do think that's a good part of the top 16, personally. I think obviously the biggest issue with top 16 is that a single round of CDH is not a lot of information.
Yeah.
There's especially, and this is especially true in like a top 4 situation where the prize pool, when you talk prize pools and how disproportionate prize pools get, right? Tier 1 has a time twister for the winner. Well, 2 through 4th are not getting something that is close to a time twister. So the amount of weight that is placed on a single game is a bit disproportionate, and that's true in top 16.
I think, funnily enough, we've also seen in a lot of tournaments where a hugely disproportionate weight was placed on a single game, and it wasn't even the finals pod. Like, there have been a lot of tournaments where essentially, if you won your semifinal, you got good prizes, and if you lost, you got more or less nothing. And then,
we're guilty of that.
Sure, the winner gets better prizes than the rest of the people in the semifinal, but even then, the person who walked away with the worst deal at, for example, Tier 1 Con, walked away with, a Bayou and a Badlands or something?
Something like that, yeah. Just
in the finals pod, and
an unreasonable amount. In the semis got nothing.
Yeah, the
like if you lost in semis, literal empty hand.
Can I soapbox for this topic for just a second here?
Go for it.
So I think that this is actually one of the things that is going to take the CDH community a little bit of time to get used to, but is going to very quickly become the standard. The simple fact of the matter is that people do not go to CDH tournaments because of positive EV.
Yep.
And a big fancy prize pool at the top, it does exactly one thing for you, and that's publicity. It doesn't make your tournament structure more, it doesn't increase the tournament integrity. In fact, it decreases it because it incentivizes king making, which is another subject. What will convince people to come to events in the next 5 years is that the events themselves are engaging and entertaining, that the non-event things that are happening are engaging and entertaining. If every person who walks into a CDH tournament gets something, and every person who makes a top bracket gets something, even if that something is not worth a lot of money, you will attract more people, and they will have a better experience than if you take all of that money that you would have spent on those prizes going out to everybody and just put it in the top 4, or in the top 1, or in the top 16. Like, intangibles, like non-financially incentivizing prizes, like cool playmats or altar sleeves, which is one of Monarch's sponsors, things like that create better memories and better experiences than a super top-loaded prize pool. And Monarch is probably not going to be spending very much money increasing its prize pool. Like, you see this in esports where it's like, well, okay, it's $1 million major or a $5 million major or whatever it may be. I don't think that that's a good idea, and I think that we should, that as a community, as a whole community, we should be trying to shy away from that, because I don't think that that's what the future of a CDH tournament is. I don't think that a $1 million major is the right format for CDH. What you should do is take that $1 million and make sure that everybody who comes up to your event gets something cool out of it, so that, what they're playing for is the experience, not for money.
What are you, some sort of communist?
No, I'm just Canadian.
I'm Canadian and I want my prizes first.
That's just because you win them all. If you didn't just win all the events, then you wouldn't have that much of an opinion. If you lost all your events,
hey, he's not the one who's all-time CDH earnings leader.
That's true.
But yeah, no, like I actually definitely agree in terms of like I think also just the fact that, unfortunately enough, this is just how it is. CDH is sort of just like poker, but with more variance. And it's just like not a super healthy thing to like just reward, like have ever increasing prize pools rewarding like basically variance above most other things. Obviously, everybody here can agree skill plays a very large factor in actually doing well consistently in tournaments, but in terms of actually like taking down tournaments for the most part, or like getting to day 2, there's a whole lot of variance involved that you can't really control for, and that gets even worse and worse as the player base expands and these tournaments get larger. And I think that like expanding prize pools and like funneling it toward the top of those tournament structures results in probably worse experiences overall for a majority of the field than just having like a well-run event that goes smoothly, has great side events, and like has just like a great venue for people to just hang out and play games and talk.
Yeah, and and definitely like I think because the variance is so high, it doesn't like we're never gonna hit a point where like even with like prize pools that we weren't top loading, because the variance is so high, I don't think we'll ever reach a point where like you can consistently money and at least like cover your travel expenses even like that. I think that's pretty.
Yeah,
you'd have to be in order for someone to consistently money, you'd have to have like very long tournaments, because like even if you win 50% of your games, which is insane, right? Like that's literally twice above expected value, depending on how you convert that to like 1v1 win rate. That's like better than any like pick your favorite pro. They don't have that win rate. Like even then, that still means if you have to have 2-2 and good breakers to money, let's say, you're gonna not money like a third of the time or a quarter of the time or whatever.
Yeah.
Like,
you have to run them like chess tournaments where it's like a chess tournament takes like an entire week and you play like 2 games a day on an aggressive schedule. Like it would just have to take like just so long to run them to make
something
that happen.
Else.
So not even aspiring to that seems to be correct, but yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I think something else here that sort of reminded me as you were talking there. If you're trying to guarantee being in the money, you're playing as a team, right? You and let's say 3 other people are all showing up, and you have, before you even sit down to play at any game, knowledge of who you're going to try to make win when you sit down to do it. Let's just like a hypothetical here. Let's imagine you're in the grand finals of a CDH tournament. 2 of the players are Channel Fireball. Whatever. Just pick a random pro team. They're going to kingmake each other. They're going to play with the intention of making sure that one of those 2 are going to win, right? This problem is hugely exacerbated in CDH, and it already exists in regular tournament Magic, right? I had a great talk with Brian Koval, who's a pro, and that's pretty much what he was saying, that like CDH players are not ready for what pros will do to a multiplayer format, because they will team up and make the shit out of each other. And there's nothing, there's absolutely nothing we can do about it.
Yeah. I mean, if you think the spite play discussion from like whatever, like 2 years ago, whenever it was a hot topic about like, what is like packing that you can't pay for it, like a spite play or whatever. If you think those were bad, get to the point where you're playing like actual like real tournament CDH with stakes in the line, and people are like, yeah, I know that my friend 3 tables over is competing against you in terms of win rate and play and like win percentage, or like opponent win percentage. So I'm gonna make this other person in the spot because I know I can't win, but I need you to not win so that my teammate can have better breakers. Like,
plus, like, let me ask you this: like, are you willing to lie to somebody for 50K?
Yeah, of course.
Right?
like a vast majority, like, you might say no as a competitor, and like I respect that. I personally, like, I'm questionable on whether or not I actually would do that. But a vast majority of the player base of CDH would 100% lie for, like, if you're in a finals pod and the difference between first and losing in that finals pod is like 10K or whatever, yeah, you're gonna lie your ass off and try to make that fucking 20K instead of the 10K that you're getting for second.
Yeah, I like to think that I wouldn't do that. I've also never been in a situation where it's like a huge amount of money. Like, I don't think I'm that good of a person. Like, I don't know. I just think that like prize pools increasing is cool. I think it's a good sign of what's happening. But how they're split is super important, and the more top-loaded, the more problems you're going to run into.
Yeah. Anyway, getting back to day 2 in general. Yeah, so like this does inform a lot of that. Obviously, I think there's actually a fair amount of crossplay between. I mean, I think the tournament format in terms of ensuring fairness comes first, and by like a large margin. But certainly, equitable prizing. Holy moly! Or like reasonable prizing splits is like has some amount of impact on like how you actually structure closed rounds. Just because like if you're doing closed rounds of like in some unbalanced manner where people are like guaranteed to get to top tables, better than some other people, then like depending on the prize pool, you end up with just like huge discrepancies, for different numbers of games played /1. So, there's some informing that goes on there. But yeah, in terms of alternatives to top 16, I guess, I think probably the the one that I know have experimented with a lot in the past has been top 13. Have you done like theory crafting for other formats like that you think might have merit?
Yeah, so we have, when we were working on the MSTR, or the MSIPG, or it was the MSTR. We were working on the MSTR and we were talking about what our tournament structure was going to be for different sizes. We had 4, 16, and then something bigger than 16, right? 16 is great. It works up to a certain point. If you have 250 players, I don't know if a cut to top 16 is still appropriate, right? That's a very small fraction of your total player pool. Regular traditional 1v1 Magic is top 8 the whole way down. It doesn't matter how big your event is, you still only cut to top 8. So there's some interesting baseline there. But one that
you also play, like, it's important to note, you have the context of you're playing, like, I believe GPs were 15 rounds and then a cut to top 8. Not 4 or 5.
Like, the number of rounds scales up with the number of players as opposed to the size of the top cut.
Yeah. So I think that the piece here, or at least what we talked about doing for bigger than top 16 was top 40. That's what's currently in the MSTR. Although we're happy to change that, right? Like that's not set in stone by any stretch of imagination. And the premise behind top 40 is the top 8 are cut directly to semifinals. The remaining 32 play 8 pods. So you play essentially 8 pods, 4 pods, 1 pod. So it's triple 3 rounds of single elimination. We heard loud and clear when we did top 64 at Oktoberfest last year that was an absolute nightmare. And we also had timing issues with it. So we're going to see how top 40 plays out.
Confirm.
Yeah. We're going to see how top 40 plays out, like when it comes up in events, but I'm pretty confident that this is not the long run solution for top cut.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that like makes this all tricky is that from a tournament narrative, content creation, event organization perspective, single elimination makes sense. But like it's actually CDH is such a high variance format that I think ideally you wouldn't be knocked out on your entire tournament wouldn't hinge on a single game, like more or less ever, unless you were like I think it's fine if you are just below sort of the result you need to get in, but just like, okay, I made top 16, let's say I did quite well, maybe I'm even like highly seeded in the top 16, I placed 6th, let's say, and then it's like, oh, I mulled to 4. Like I drew a hand without lands, and then like a hand that was just did nothing, and then like, oh, I'm at 5, whatever, or even I mulled to 5, and someone else opened like add some crazy opener, like
just land crypt. Okay. Risk study, great, cool.
Yeah, I mean, just like, all right, cool. I'm out of this tournament on the basis of like mulligans in one game, is not a great feeling. And how do we sort of manage that? How do we manage that reality with, like, okay, but from the perspective of people watching the tournament or people organizing it, like, single elimination is by far the best way of doing it. Double elimination involves just like the most disgusting, like, I remember, I don't know if you remember, Nick, in one of our chats, I sent you something that was like, so yeah, you'd have like a top 27 cut, and then you'd seed one person directly into the finals, and then, or like, you'd seed one person into the finals, and then there'd be a double elimination round, and then like you'd add in some people to like fill out the losers bracket pods, and it was just like it was absolutely
incredibly
disgusting.
complex. Yeah,
it's extremely complicated. But like the alternative, at least the biggest one to my mind, is like a top 4 round. Like, you cut very small, but make those players play more than one game. What happens if you do a top 4 with one of the other ways to play a single pod? So you could do a fixed quantity of games, right? So like the top pod plays 3 or 4, or you could do like a 1st to 2. So first person to win 2 games. Both of these have the immediate consequence of the stakes in a given game being different than the stakes in a game immediately following it, specifically with relation to specific opponents. I think you both have both played in tournaments with 1st to 2 pods. I'm sure you can speak to some of the consequences of that structure.
Yep. I mean, there's just the there's the dynamics change too much over the course of the entirety of the finals. But very simple example: you win game 1, nobody in game 2 wants you to win. They all kingmake against you. So if you ever have a chance to win your game 2, because winning 2 games immediately wins you the tournament. So if you win game 1, everybody will do everything in their power to make you not win game 2 just so they get a chance at a game 3. Same thing for those 2 people who won the first 2 games for game 3, and et cetera, et cetera. It gets very weird very quickly, and there's a lot of, again, perverse incentives in terms of the incentives of the tournament format are different than from the incentives of a given game.
Oh yeah, here. I found that this was like one of the suggestions I came up with. A top 34 cut. The top 2 move directly to semis. 3 to 34 play a round. The 8 winners move to the semis. The 24 losing players play another round. The 6 winners move to the semis, and then you have 16 people. Was like
and then,
one of the
and then you
things
do
I
a top
thought about.
16 cut.
Yeah. And then there were some other ones that got just increasingly ugly, of like filling out more, filling out loser brackets pods, because if you look at like a lot of fighting games do double elimination, where you're in the winners bracket, you lose your first game, you go to the losers bracket, you lose in the losers bracket, and you're out. But the problem with that is that like in that situation, when you have 1v1 games, as long as you have twice as many people in the winners bracket as the losers bracket, the math just sort of works out cleanly, right? Like, you eliminate half the people in the losers bracket, and then they have the same number. You eliminate half the people in the losers bracket, half the people from winners move to losers and play against the remaining half, and the math just works quite nicely. But when you have a 3-1 split, like, instead of going, okay, we have 32 and 32, then we have 16 and 16, and then we have whatever. It's like, okay, we have 32 and 32, or we have 32 people, then we have, then we have, or even if we start with 64 to make the math a little bit nicer, you get an extra round, right? Then you have 48 and 16, and then you have 4 and 28, like, you get, or sorry, not 28, 24, which still works. But then after that, you have 6 winners in the losers bracket from 24 players, and then you have 3 people moving down from winners bracket, and now you have 9 people. What do you do there? Like, it gets extremely
I'm like
extremely awkward.
Yeah, I'm like good at this stuff, and I'm confused. Like,
Yeah,
you know,
and that's all the listeners actually need to hear is that like it's just too much. Nobody that's ever like you would only be able to run like any of these theoretical formats in basically an invitational. You like there's no way you could like trust the general populace. You couldn't trust me with understanding this format playing the mat. Like you would literally have to handhold me through an entire tournament of like, here's what you're playing next. Here's what you have to like do, like. Can I afford to lose this one? No. Okay, who am I playing? Can I afford to lose this one? No. Okay, who am I playing? Etc. Etc. And like, where are we? Where? How many wins away is prizing? Like, just yeah.
One interesting idea that I haven't
complex.
really seen theorized, or at least built out in any depth, is rather than counting wins, counting losses. Right. So, for example, you could say, well. And then, you know, this might be an adapt. If you wanted to adapt fluid, you could adapt it this way. It would be like, okay, you're going to play games until you've lost 3. And then however many wins you have after that point will help determine what your standing is. Or, you know, something along the lines where you have a self sort of whittling process over the course. So, for example, let's say you do Swiss. And after round 3, a bunch of people are just kicked out. They're done. But after round 4, only some number are kicked out. And you sort of whittle it down over time until you get to a place where there's very few people remaining, or you reach the end of the number of rounds. And this also helps address some of the variance issue by reducing the total number of people in each round after round 3 or 4 or whatever your cut's going to be. So, you know, if you only are playing 4 pods, it's much, much more likely that some of those all of those games will end before time than if you have 25 or 30 pods.
Yeah, it gives you like way better like promptness in terms of actually finishing on time, which is again still a large issue for CEH tournaments.
Yeah,
bears repeating as many times as we have to say it. But yeah, all of this to say, basically, day 2 is still a mess for any tournament format for this format. If you have any experience TOing incredibly complex games with weird incentives and like really weird elimination structures, you should definitely contact like just somebody in this community so that we can figure this out. So, yeah,
just find your random CEH player off the street. If they have Discord, let them know and have them come to us. Like, please.
But yeah, The bow on this is not a neat one, but it's a bow that says this is still a work in progress. Come back later. We're not finished wrapping this present yet.
Yeah. Until then,
cool.
top 16 away.
Yeah, pretty much. So that's our discussion on like day 1, day 2. Which I think pretty good. I think we covered a lot of ground there. We do have some other just interesting stuff to talk about in terms of tournaments that we'll just clean up quickly, and then we'll get on to everybody's favorite favorites. I forgot the word. Anyway, moving on. So a couple of things here. This is one that's come up fairly recently as well. Specifically with Tier 1, they've done some tournaments with some of these incentives. And I think there have been some other tournaments with stuff like this. Anyway, the idea of incentivizing playing in like prerequisite tournaments for an open tournament. So not qualifiers for like a closed tournament, but say that there are like multiple smaller tournaments leading up to one large tournament. How do you incentivize those players playing in the small tournaments to want to do well in those tournaments before they play in the larger tournament? Typically how you'd see this done in like 60 card formats or just like 1v1 tournaments in general would typically be with buys. If you do particularly well at a qualifier, you would get like a buy or 2 buys in your GP. Unfortunately, that gets a bit strange with CEH. I think people are trying it. I believe Tier 1 Con has run it last year and is running it this year with buys as rewards.
Yes, there's a bunch of players who are getting buys in round 1 of Tier 1 Con.
Yes. But is there a better way to reward players? Because buys, I'm gonna be real, bit of a nightmare.
Are they?
I think so. At least in terms of you have to separate the players who earned buys versus the players who just happen to have a buy because of an odd number of players in a tournament.
That seems to me like a logistical or a technical issue, but not a structural one, personally.
Okay. Do you think that buys are the best way to reward players in this manner?
So up until I read the notes that you had here, the answer was yes. But I've started thinking about the other option here, which for the listener is static point bonuses. So you just give them some number of points. I have a lot of questions and thoughts about that because I actually think that might be a very elegant solution to the problem of taking an entire round away from a player with which to contribute to the knowledge of that player's skill. Right, because I think that's the biggest issue with buys is that you basically say to a player and to all players that, hey, yeah, this person, we're not going to collect any data on them. Instead, they just get a win, and that's not great.
Like it reduces variance for them, which like isn't actually necessarily what you want. Like that's I don't necessarily think that reducing variance for a given player is the reward that you want to give them. The reward that you want to give them is a higher percentage chance of winning the event, but you don't want to like reduce their variance over the rest of the players in the event.
Yeah, especially when each game matters so much in this format. Right,
exactly.
A single buy in a 12 or 15 round tournament is a very different thing than one buy out of 4 rounds.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, potentially the other option here is, I mean, there's obviously you can go deeper down the rabbit hole than just static point bonuses. You can give like people just like automatically better breakers, etc., etc. Gets a bit weirder, but yeah, let's talk about like the alternatives here. I think static point bonuses definitely have potentially a place, or at least deserve to be potentially given a chance, or at least thought over a bit more. It could be interesting in terms of maybe in a tournament where you get 3 points for a win to give a player like a 2-point bonus at the initial starting the event to put them on a higher standing, but it's still in a place where if they lost all of their rounds, they could be outplaced. It would like give them better seeding moving into the top portion of the event. It would give them like better breakers sort of by default, but maybe doesn't give them a full win's worth of points.
Yeah, it also depends on how many points you're doing for wins, right? Like the MSIPG or the MSDR recommends 5 points for a win instead of 3, which has to do with the fact that if a draw is worth 1, then you're adding 4 points to the system with a draw, and 5. It's just sort of there really isn't a ton of issues in terms of three draws being worth the same as a win. But if you start adding static point bonuses, then you add another layer of math that is worth considering, right? What is the optimal amount? How many buys are worth a pre-event win? And how many buys plus pre-event wins are worth 1 win in the event itself? Which is an interesting sort of way to start thinking about the point structure of an event.
Right. Would you ever consider like just giving like default better breakers on the same scoreline for as a reward, or do you think that goes too far in terms of just sort of like messing with tournament structures?
It technically, so when you talk about like buys, in some ways you are doing that, right?
You're giving them
the breaker is your points, right? The
Right.
breaker is your points. When you start messing with breakers after that, like if you're saying, okay, so whatever
like
your
second and third degree breakers,
yeah. So let's say, because let's take a hypothetical here. One potential option. We could say that if you have a pre-event win, you will be the highest ranked after points are considered. So, for example, let's say, you're cutting to top 4, and players 3, 4, 5, and 6 all have the same point score line. Well, if any of those 4 players won a pre-event, you'll just move them right to the top. You just ignore breakers after points and say you're number 1 because you have the pre-event thing. Well, obviously it introduces the problem of, well, what if there are multiple? But that's you can go back to breakers with that.
Yeah.
In terms of adding something just like flat to the breaker system, I think the bigger issue is the fact that our second line breaker after points sucks. Like, it's terrible.
Yeah.
We don't have a good one. We don't have a good
one.
way
Yeah.
to do breakers yet, right? And so
Sorry,
Yeah,
I know
no.
Morgan is seething because of some issues in tournaments that we've run into before with breakers. It just TOs in general choosing really bad options for second degree breakers. Anyway, continue.
yeah, I think the bigger issue there is just that second and third degree breakers suck. With second degree breakers, when you do so buys in CDH right now, at least this is how it was ran last year at tier 1, this is how it'll be run again at this tier 1 with buys. Is if you have a buy, it is not counted as a part of the games you have played, but you won't have played in round 1. So for example, if you are 2-2, you've played 3 games and your win percentage is 33%, as opposed to somebody else who played 2-2, which is 50%. Well, that's bad, right? That's not good for a buy. So we have to differentiate between people who earned buys and received buys.
Right.
And so you end up in the situation where you have to try to balance the second degree breakers where, okay, this is a game, the earned buy is a game that you played and therefore does count towards win percent unless it doesn't benefit you for it to count towards win percent, in which case it doesn't do that. And it's this weird, very bizarre, weird sort of like, there's just not a good system for it.
How could it not benefit you to count it towards win percent if it's a win?
I don't know. I know that I messed around a bunch with different ways to incorporate earned buys versus assigned buys, and I never found a system that worked well with breakers. So my point is that it is still unsolved, and I would like to hear more about ways that we can solve it, because it's messy.
Yeah, for the record, this entire episode is just Joking screaming for help about anybody who has experience in TOing events, or just like any mathematical analysis or statistical analysis at all.
I remember looking up because I've engaged in this discussion a few times. I was like, well, what does I was like, okay, what's a game that people play competitively that has more than a 1 versus 1 format? And all I could come up with was the Settlers of Catan.
Yep.
Yes. That is the exact same conclusion that I came to.
And I looked it up, and their tournament format, the thing is that they have such an excellent breaker that they can afford to just have almost all of their results be determined by breakers.
It's just total points, right?
Yeah, the game is get to 10 points.
Yeah.
So the incredibly obvious breaker is, well, how many points did you get? We just don't have CDH pods, despite some people man, I've seen people propose formats where they're like, yeah, so if you're second place you get 1 point. I'm like, what does that even mean?
Yeah.
I forgot about that. This entire episode, I have not thought about trying to assign a second place in pods, because that was one of the first things that we eliminated from our events, was like,
oh yeah,
there's one winner and 3 losers and no other outcomes.
Or a draw.
Yeah.
Because you just can't do it in a fair way. And that's the other reason why CDH is also nightmare hellscape of tournament organization, is because you have exactly 1 winner and there's no way to rank the losers in a given game.
I think technically you can rank them if they, if you wanted to, you could rank them in did they die before
Order
the one
of
player
death,
who
yeah.
won. But that has problems as well.
Yep.
But especially man, there's so many, does that mean Najila players get to assign the points however they want?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, or you just get screwed by turn order if somebody brain freezes your whole library, and it's like, well, if you're next, you're about to lose first.
And then even aside from that, just I don't want you to have points, so I'm just gonna focus on beating you to death, and whatever happens with the rest of the game.
Let's just double down on it, and if you win, you're removed from the pod, but the game continues.
Oh, I thought you were gonna go to the other direction, where if you win, you just get to assign who got second, third, and fourth.
Sorry, you're right. That's an even better idea. We should.
It's like the
that.
MTGO system where everyone just gets to vote for whoever.
Yeah.
I'd be
All
curious. I'd be curious to see an invitational where you were able to, if you win with Thassa's Oracle, you receive first place and are removed from the pod, and then the pod continues. Not because I think it'd be like a good tournament structure, because it'd be really good content. I think
it would be entertaining as hell.
It'd be extremely entertaining, but I don't know if that's a good choice for a GP scale CDH tournament.
Yeah, actually, it creates like a super interesting question of like, okay, this person's going for a win. I think they have a lot of protection. Do I try and stop them? Or do I hold these 2 counter spells, let them win, and go for second? I think it makes a terrible tournament format, but like it would be really funny cool to see once,
Yeah. The actual thought process of going through that
tournament is what I
love. Got it. So we'll lock you in for the booth when Monarch does that next summer, and
just run it as a side event alongside.
Just day 2, everybody's lost. All right, come play some wonky Magic. Let's just get some numbers on the board to see what.
Like. It's just all. So you play it with Plane Chase and you play it with no ban list, and then it's just everybody, free for all.
I built this no ban list deck today that wins on or before turn 2 90% of the time. It's disgusting. It's so fast.
Oh god, I just realized that I opened the no ban list can of worms. Okay, I'm gonna put the can back on that one real quick, tape it up, and we'll move on. I mean, so aside from that, Morgan, did you have anything pressing that you wanted to get to before we get to everybody's favorite segment?
No, I think we did a pretty good job of sort of summing up the issues that we were facing in
CDH tournaments. Yeah. Cool. In that case, I think we'll wrap up our main episode or main topic there and get to, again, gut check, everybody's favorite segment. And of course, I'm not going to leave you hanging. Gut check.
Gut check.
Yeah, there you go. Where do you fall on the scale of enthusiastic gut checks, Nick?
I am probably not particularly enthusiastic. Unless I've been drinking. I feel like I would, 2 or 3 drinks in, I would full send, on gut check.
Gotcha.
But
can't
right
build
now,
up the courage otherwise.
Yeah, right now I'm just a little too sober to bring that kind of, reckless enthusiasm to gut check.
Honestly, right. I feel like if I were a guest on a show that had a segment like this, I would just be we've kind of accepted that, like, our answers are just, like, sometimes, nonsense, but if it was like, okay, I get one chance to, like...
Yeah. I do sort of feel bad for Phil. I tried to phrase it in the most charitable way possible, but the gut check in the channel in the Discord is definitely, like, you gotta rate him on his card evaluation skills, which is, like, Anyway, Here's the initial question. This is gonna get cut out if it's terrible, but I hope it goes well.
I'm excited.
Joking.
Yeah.
This is directed at you, but we will both give our answers as well. Here's the gut check. Would you rather TO a tournament by hand, so pencil and paper, no computers, no mechanical help, by hand, or TO a tournament with a Krark deck in every pod?
Oh my god, that's a phenomenal question. Krark deck easy because I can issue them game losses.
Yep. I guess you just gotta change. Yeah, you have to let them play it through in time. Okay. Is the qualifier there?
No. I don't mean like just like I'm not saying unjustified game losses, right? I'm not saying like I'm just gonna DQ them out of every game, but I mean like we have structure like
only the games where they cast Krark.
Yeah, exactly. Sakashima only, it's fine,
So you'll just have a bunch of laser focused judges, and if any of them miss any triggers, you just immediately start issuing them warnings. Effectively, is what you're saying.
Yeah, we opened the can of worms a little. I'll speak just briefly to the Krark thing. Krark, I don't think is going to be too much of a problem in the future. It definitely could be, right? It definitely could be, but I think that it's much more likely that players are going to realize that they are going to get destroyed if they play Krark because everybody hates the deck. Like, one, one slight benefit of being a 4-player multiplayer tournament is that if 3 players in the pod hate your deck, you're going to lose. Like they'll just destroy you. Like you can't win 1 versus 3. So if Kark is making people as miserable as it sometimes has been reputed to be, there are natural mechanisms in effect to address that. And the same is true from a tournament organizer side, right? If I have a single player Kark player who's a problematic, like many Kark players are not problematic. There are some that are. If you are not good enough at playing your deck, we will issue a game loss for it, and then you won't play it in the future, or you'll get good enough that you're not a problematic Kark player anymore. Like there's very much this sort of self-correcting mechanism with the deck, where either you're good enough with it for it to not be a problem, or you're so bad with it that either everybody hates dealing with you and so you lose, or we have to issue you game losses so you lose, and you'll stop playing the deck either way. So I think that, like, my fingers crossed, the worst that Kark is ever going to be has already passed.
I didn't have "it's fine, we can just bully the Kark players" on my bingo card of things that were going to be said this episode.
Well, apparently that's where we got to.
I'm not bullying Kark players. What my play group has a player who plays Kark every time. The only deck he ever plays is Kark. So I've had my fair share of dealing with it, I guess, is my point.
All right, Morgan, what do you got?
I think I would just do a Kark deck in every pod, and unfortunately, see, the problem with your answer, Nick, is not that it wasn't a good answer. It's that it brought up that we didn't even really discuss issuing game losses in tournaments, which is another important part of the structure. But yeah, I think you just have to have judges be vigilant and come up with guidelines for when to start issuing slow play warnings, and then honestly it doesn't matter what people are playing like that much, because you can issue slow play warnings to people who think for 10 or 15 seconds on every spell Kark casts when they're casting 7,000 spells in a turn, as well as any player who is also just taking too long to execute their combo.
Right.
But if it was you can only use a spreadsheet, an Excel spreadsheet, with no Python or anything, just a spreadsheet and Excel formulas, I would have taken that. But
I'll give you an Abacus final offer.
I mean, sure, I just wouldn't TO. I'd just spend all day playing with the Abacus.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
I you know what? I think depending on the size of the tournament, I actually might be able to. I might prefer running it pencil and paper. It would require a lot of setup time, but I think if you do the setup ahead of time, it wouldn't be too nightmarish.
I mean, I guess doing random pods, you can actually just you can prepare all the pods ahead of time.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. You just do it all ahead of time.
The lone issue, the only reason I wouldn't want to do a pen and paper tournament is breakers. Everything else you can deal with.
Just make it long enough that you don't have to. Easy game.
Oh, I was thinking you just pick randomly from the people in the thing. The breaker is my choice.
Can I
didn't say it had to be a good tournament.
Or a fair enough. Tournament.
Yeah.
Yeah, you'll just play the same pod 3 rounds in a row and we'll be good. We'll just go there.
Exactly.
And
so I have a follow-up gut check question that I think is even shorter than this gut check question. Would you rather play in a 3-round tournament with 1 pod with 3 Kark decks in it and 2 normal pods, or play in a 3-round tournament with 1 Kark deck in each pod?
Do I know ahead of time?
You do.
Okay. I think the first option, and I'd bring a deck that's full of pyroclasms. Because it's a guaranteed
But then you have
win.
all of these pyroclasms in rounds 2 and 3.
Yeah, and then you just sort of hedge and hope that you play against dork decks. Yeah, you just play 5-ish pyroclasms, nuke the Krark decks to oblivion, try to pick up that free win, and then just hope to ride it out for the next 2 rounds.
Fair enough.
I feel like if you know that there's maybe 1 Krark deck per round isn't enough to like counterpick very effectively.
Yeah.
Probably not, yeah.
Cool. I think that actually about wraps it up for this episode. Nick, do you want to let people know where they can find you, where they can find Monarch, what they should be looking at soon?
Yes, I shall shill. It is time for maximum shill.
You
can find Monarch every Saturday streaming the Major League Commander at twitch.tv/Monarch Media. You can find us on Twitter at Monarch Media TW, I think. You can find us on YouTube. You can find us on Discord. We are on all of the platforms. You can find me on Twitter and on Discord, just sort of browsing and perusing and top-4ing tournaments on occasion. And, of course, most importantly, stay tuned for Oktoberfest. Tickets will be going up soon, either shortly after this is released or before this is released. We got tons of space, tons of really cool guests, tons of really cool stuff. It'll be in downtown Philadelphia, November 18th, November 19th, and November 20th. So it's 18th through the 20th of November in downtown Philadelphia. So make sure to come to Oktoberfest. Both of you are, right?
Oh, yeah.
We'll make the planning on it.
All right. You better. I'll be mad if you don't.
Oh, no.
The wrath of Nick.
See, the thing is that I know how much Trans-Canada flights cost, so I know that you're never going to come to Toronto to take any action on your anger.
I have a layover in Toronto on my way back from Tier 1.
How long is the layover?
1 hour, 47 minutes.
All right, I'm fine. I'm safe.
All right, Joking, thanks so much for coming on. It was a blast. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
And that does wrap it up for this episode. If you guys would like to reach out to us with any questions, comments, or concerns, you can contact us on Twitter at IntoTheNorthPod, via our email at IntoTheNorthPodcast@gmail.com, or on our Discord server, the invite which for link can be found in the description for this episode. An extra special thanks to all of our patrons who help cover the expenses for our show and allow us to work toward improving the quality of the podcast. If you too would like to become a patron, we're at patreon.com/IntoTheNorthPodcast. Another way you can support us is via our TCG Player affiliate link. Anytime you want to purchase something from TCG Player, if you use our affiliate link, which is in the description, a portion of your purchase goes towards supporting the podcast. Thank you, as always, to the band Vox Cadre for our lovely podcast music, and to Nate Slover for our equally lovely podcast logo. Next episode will be out in 2 weeks. Till then, see ya.